Roll. Perfect. All right, great. Well, hey, million thanks everybody for being willing to take your time here to join in. I really consider that an honor that you're investing that time here, and my hope is that I'll be able to provide it, make it meaningful for you. It's a I love storytelling, and I think of growing up as a kid, something we all loved, gravitated to is hey, so and so's telling stories, and we'd all run up, and this is something that I'm finding is a part of my new phase in my life and career, something I really enjoy doing with the hope that it inspires and influences others and engages them. So we'll really start to today's conversation, which is a modern day vision quest. And this is an amazing experience I was so fortunate to have. And it's what I call the modern day vision quest. It was an adventure, for me to really to get out and try to understand, see the world, and only to realize is that I just became the student wherever I went. I just was open to adventure. And I'll tell you a little bit about the story, what got there, and some incredible stories along the way. But to just sum it up, to sort of start it off with, is that, me, and I'm going to reveal more of me in this, and that's really who I am. And my life is literally an open book today. And it's part of the book I published, Discovering Michael, an inspirational guide to personal growth and self discovery. And I reveal self with the hope that I'm a guide and inspiration to others who are interested in that kind of focus on personal growth and self discovery. But for me, I had healed and a tough past. That's frankly, there's no other way to put it. I'll touch on that in a few moments. And from that, I was fortunate to really have gotten past some real key issues that were a part of a very challenging childhood that I grew up with. And but then, from that, it wasn't enough. I really then found that I was just so inspired to go out and figure out life. I was this emerging explorer that wanted to get out, go see and figure out life and how I fit into this. And I was inspired by the movie. If you ever saw it, Kevin Costner in Dances with Wolves, you'll know what I'm talking about. And I'll refer to that in a couple of moments here. And that was a real inspiration for me, as it was John Dunbar, his character in that movie. And at that point in my early 30s, I left a full time job to go backpack and volunteer around the world. And it was there that I came face to face with situations that challenged my prior beliefs and ultimately resulted in learning about life itself. So this time it's a collection of true stories. And that's where, again, as I mentioned, feel free to chime in, engage, share, ask comments, but it's not needed, right? It's not necessary, but I'd certainly love to hear it in a way to help make it engaging for yourself as well. So, a brief introduction to the real me, right? I've known, met many of you, worked with you in various capacities. Again, a great honor that you're willing to take the time to really experience this conversation and talk really about a real key aspect of my life. And really, after I turned my life around, as I mentioned, growing up in a very difficult setting, had a lot of issues, and I was able to turn my life around. And then, really, from there, I was able to go out and have really my little rearview mirror a pretty stellar career. I was amazed. I had all kinds of opportunities, executive director for a non for profit, a 4 year political appointment, believe it or not. It was what an amazing experience. And then really settling most of my career as an educator, leader, and coach over the last 20 years. I worked for some great companies, a lot of great achievements in there. But be honest with you, as I learned in hospice care, and I'll talk about that as well as an avid hospice volunteer, that no one of my people that I worked with as a volunteer, hundreds that I had worked with over the course of years, ever talked about work, as a part of their life reflection. And I found that to be true of me already, is that what really, as much as I enjoyed meeting, connecting with people, the accomplishments that I've done, it was really the experience abroad as well as domestically, in what I call travel, right? That combination of volunteering and traveling, that I really had a chance to backpack around the world. And it's a key theme for today's talk because it was in these opportunities that I really had a chance to get acquainted with people from all walks of life and learn from them. And it was a gift to me because from that and that summation of thousands of these experiences, I was really able to piece together a new meaning towards life, and more importantly, also how I fit in. Just quickly before I start, I do a number of talks and workshops on the topic of personal growth, self-discovery, and enlightenment. And I developed a framework, and that's something that's unique and I've been recognized for in this genre of personal growth and self-discovery, is this framework in terms of the ability to really understand what this journey is all alike. And I just share that up front for those that are inquisitive, because it's also going to relate to what my experience was. Is that like a tree, we're sort of just, in order to have our full self, to reach our full potential, all begin as that seed, right? And just like a tree, it begins as a seed. And from it, it's the formation of the roots. Very critical that we have a healthy root system for the tree to grow well. Well, that healthy root system for us psychologically is our psychology, our self-esteem. And if we have issues like I did from troubled past or whatever the situations might be, low self-esteem, et cetera, whatever it might be, we're obviously not going to be able to feed and grow our tree well. And then the second phase of it is after getting your self-esteem built, your back on the feet back on the ground, is really that period I call self-discovery. And that's a point is okay, here I am, and I like who that person is in the mirror, but what am I all about? What do I want to do? And for those that aspire and have these more deeper, profound questions, it's more of that look in the mirror and taking that hard look inside to go in and really discover your potential, your purpose, your meaning. And then from that, for those that even choose to venture beyond that, is the enlightenment phase. And the enlightenment phase for me is really about that quest to understand the meaning of life. And it's that opportunity to say hey, okay, I get it. I get more about here, but why are we here? And that was a lot of what this adventure was about. I had done a lot of the work in the personal growth phase, started to do some self-discovery work, and then it was this journey that really helped me lead towards this phase of enlightenment, come to understand in my own way, an understanding of what life is all about. And it's a very personal thing, nothing I'm going to be trying to convince you or anybody on here, but it was the power of the journey itself. I love doing these talks. This is a series of different talks that I do. I've enjoyed primarily pre-COVID, when it was the in-person kind of events. And so there's a lot of topics. So if there's anything that ever intrigues you or an opportunity comes up with respect to groups or talking in front of groups, it'd be my honor to really be able to speak and to help out. So thank you for that consideration. So here we go. The story, my modern day vision quest. It was a story of me. And honestly, at that point in my life, I told you the mid 30s, I was so lost in life, and yet determined that I was going to find my way home, not jumping off the bridge. And my brother did, by the way, he had committed suicide. It was a part of a real tough, tragic past on here. But I wasn't about to do that. I understood that pain and suffering, but something drove me inside to really get beyond that. I use the word vision quest in this session because of really the importance of what that means. And I learned the importance of that spending time with American Indians. And there's really what coins the phrase, the modern day vision quest. As a matter of fact, this slide here sort of sums up some of the key elements of it. There's an article out of Huffington Post, but it really, as I said here, is where they often had the individuals in their society. Now, again, at that point in their culture, it was typically the males, the women congregated together. They basically ran the the tribe, the Indian tribe itself. And the men were kicked out at would be a young teenager age. They didn't have ages like we did here or the calendar system. So it was about when they were a teenager, they'd kick them out to go out there and spend time in nature and not to return until they understood their place in the tribe, their place in the world. And hence, that's very often where they got their name from. And I'll relate that to that movie Dances with Wolves in just a second. But it was really a powerful element. It gave that person the ability to be able to discover, themselves and to be out in life. And it was a characteristic of some of the older traditional societies. When I was in Africa volunteering and backpacking there, I noticed that some of the tribes there also had very similar traditions, which is where they would kick out those younger. And we even see that in some of the religions today. We've seen that the Mormons, they'll have the younger people go out there for a year and stay out on their own. Very powerful type settings. And backpacking, for example, very common in Europe today, where people, once they graduate, they often go out and they're on a year, maybe sometimes 2 years, to go out and utilize that time to really travel the world. So it's a powerful, powerful step to make, but something I had learned about. And it's no surprise as a result that I found a real liking towards the movie Dances with Wolves. And in here is his really character, Dunbar, played by Kevin Costner, who was lost as well. He was in the military, he was out there at war, and it was a whole bout that he had. He saw a person lose a leg and getting it chopped off. And in any case, he became really despondent to this whole concept. And he literally tried to kill himself. He was riding in front of an army just trying to be shot. Well, he never was, and then all of a sudden he became the hero. And as a result of his recognition as a hero, he was given the opportunity to go and live and work in anywhere that I forgot what they were called, military, but at that time were, and he chose the farthest away post. And he went there with the whole idea to just sit down and with a journal and to figure out life. It's a great movie, great reflection, and it relates a lot to what my experience was like. Only for him to have made this dramatic shift. The longer he was away, the more reflection he did. He encountered the American Indians, and from that experience, really began to question his own values and belief systems. And hence, even he had that vision quest. And as the American Indians, the chief of the American Indian tribe said, is you are no longer John Dunbar. You are now Dances with Wolves. And there was his experience with two wolves, one in particular named Two Socks, that he built a real connection to, and that's what really transformed him. So now that you have a context of really this concept of a vision quest, let's really talk about the vision quest and where it started. But again, just a quick reminder, please feel free, interject, to use the chat box if you want to. Richard is monitoring that. He'll interrupt me and be able to have some questions. If you have something else to share, please feel free to. But I also, again, have a great respect for those in terms of the nature of the content that may not want to, and that's fine too. I just hope that it's meaningful for you. So where did it start? Well, I too, like everybody else, was young. God, is it forever ago, right? I'm not going to say how long ago that was there, but yep, that's me. That's me there with my scooter growing up in upstate New York and ready to go out and explore my new scooter. Well, to the outside world at that point growing up, we appeared as that normal middle class family, right? At that time, the middle class was probably the largest entity, within the US today. And we did well. We had a home. We even had the first color TV, on the block. So you can imagine, again, I'm dating myself. But the challenge is what was happening on the inside. And to put it bluntly, is that it was filled with abuse. My father struggled, whatever the cause was, probably by today's standards, would have probably had some mental related kind of labels or challenges. But in any case, was an incredibly abusive person, and abused us all, physically, mentally, sexually, etc. It was, you name it, we experienced it. And my mom, for so many years, was the buffer in that. However, she succumbed to that, and at 16, she died with cancer, and leaving us alone with a dad that we basically had to maintain in survival mode. And I survived. As I survived, and it was tough, and it's not needed to really go beyond that, except to know that setting. And the importance of setting that setting is that I left out in my life. So in my early 20s, right, when we typically go out, as I ventured out into college, I had a ton of issues. I just had a lot of these issues. And so I struggled in life and was really unhappy in so many ways. And that's an important context for tonight, because people that some way or another can relate to challenges, issues, being at those times in life, being there in the past, being there present, struggle, right? And as I found and experienced wherever I went in the world, is that struggle and pain was everywhere. But it was what we do with that. And this is a story of how I turned that intensity of a traumatic position to be able to turn and execute that into a way that really rediscovered myself and life itself. In fact, this picture really meant a lot to me. I discovered this really earlier on, and it really just represented me and who I was. I felt like I was imprisoned. I was in this cell with this abuser, always looking on the outside. And it was there that I discovered that I just wanted to be an explorer. I wanted to go and see what's out there. I just imagined things. I lived in my head. In fact, this is how I would spend so much of my time at nights, is staring up at the sky, wondering what was out there. And so here's one of the great first stories to sort of portray that is there I was, probably 16, 17 at the time, out there with a group of guys who were up at the water tower in the base. And, we had a few beers. Yep, somebody had gotten them for us. And so we were sharing them, and the conversation, most of it was what it was for a bunch of guys at that time, is girls and cars and sports. And yet I often remained quiet. I was somewhat distant, always out there. And somebody turned around to me and said, Mike, what are you thinking? And I said, what's 1 inch beyond infinity? I'm not kidding. That's what came out of my mouth. What's 1 inch? And and everybody laughed. They thought I was joking. And it was sort of funny, because that was really a key part for me, because I struggled with fitting in, because I had this deep desire to think and more, from a more depth perspective. But I realized is that I could make people laugh, and it was just by sort of sharing these deep insights made a lot of people laugh. And so I really actually in a way found a way to start fitting in. But that was characteristic of me from the youngest I can ever imagine, was this desire to sort of just imagine what's out there. Well, again, just sort of bringing that into a point as we're preparing now for my vision quest. This is a good slide that sort of describes, where I was in my 20s. Is that it was tough, and these are some of the issues, right? So when you go through trauma, and some of you probably experience these types of things, is as a result of abuse and trauma, and just all the belittling and all of these comments. When you're a child, that's where so much of our beliefs are formed, right? By the time you're 7 years old, you have formulated a lot of your core beliefs about life and people in general, based on the experiences you've had. So when that's tainted, and filled with the abuse, obviously the beliefs that we have are incredibly tainted. And so all of the words being told repeatedly, you're not worthy, and and the whole stress of the situation, everything really led to the period of which, I walked out my life. I had many handicaps, right? But they were inside, right? There's people who have physical handicaps. You'll see it, they've lost a leg, an arm, or both. And you can see that and understand those things. What's hard is to be able to see the inside, the psychological impact of people because of the things like trauma. So for me, PTSD, as I discovered years later, was very characteristic of me. Anytime a stressful situation came up, it reminded me, would push that button as it related to my past, to be aware, to be on guard, to fight or flight kind of thing. Codependency and relationships. Frankly, as you'll hear, I did incredibly well at work. It was a great escape for me. But when it came to relationships and my personal life, I was havoc. It was chaos. I couldn't maintain a dating relationship. I was so shy to begin with. When I did, I didn't really know how to deal with it because I was constantly on guard as a result of my past. And it played havoc when it came to my life in terms of my relationships. And then it all sort of culminated when I was 30. So there was this wake up call that really sort of escalated the pain and suffering. It was a point of which it was too much. And for me, that was where it was the fight or flight syndrome, right? If I was going to walk off the bridge, and I'll be the first to admit, contemplated it at that point. As I mentioned, my brother had done that, which probably for me was a great reason not to, knowing the trauma went through for that. And as a result of it, I decided, no, I've got to find a way. And so I finally reached out for help. It was a result of, at that point, I finally was dating. I had a relationship for several years, which was new, novel for me, but as a result of her deciding to leave that relationship, to me, it just led me to the bottom. That whole period of depression, and compounded by all of the issues that I had, it really was a tough experience for me. So as a result of that, they say, as is the point always comes out, is that when you're in trouble, right, there's always help around you. It's a matter of whether or not you can see it. And in fact, I'll show it to you on the next slide here, which is that, help is on the way, right? Is that there's a great Buddha statement, proverb here: when the student ready is, the teachers will come. Well, that's what happened to me. Is that I reached out to help. A friend of mine had suggested going to a 12-step group for adult children of alcoholics, and it allowed me to get me into a stable place for the first time, where I realized that I wasn't alone. There were others that were struggling as well. And I started to make connections and started to build myself from the ground up. And I know there is one of the attendees was there with me, and I was there with him very, very early on. Here is probably the person here I've known the longest. We can both talk about an experience where we both came from traumatic backgrounds and beginning to make it work. So what started to happen? What were some of the things that started to develop? Well, as I mentioned, there was the 12-step groups. One of my favorite is this group called the Lunch Bunch. And so I was at work at the time. I was doing well in work, but it was very obvious to others that I was going through a difficult situation. And so I would take off each lunch, go to the Lunch Bunch, and really, again, just connect with others, helped make me feel a little bit whole, a little bit better during the day, get back to work so that I could continue forward. Well, it was really interesting is because at work, my role was, as a high performer, they recognized me as a high performer, was to take a 2-year stint in corporate management education. And it was a group of where they asked me and they said, is that you're a high performer. We want to develop the leadership capability within you. So we're going to ask you to now go and create a leadership curriculum, something new, different, novel, to really create great leaders, and you're going to be the first student. You're going to put yourself through this whole thing with the whole idea that you'll be the pilot case. You'll be the one that will test this out, and then we'll launch this curriculum across the company. And so, what a novel, what a tremendous experience that was. And it began with taking assessments, right? So, I decided that people, as I read a lot of information, there was a lot of book about great leaders then. But what I discovered is that there was a psychological study or content out there that really talked about the content, what makes a great leader. And these were some incredibly great people in addition to how they ran the business. And it was there that I started to understand that and make the connection that a great leader begins with what's inside the leader, not just the behaviors and what they do. So that's why we chose that assessments were going to be a key part of being a leader. You'd be exposed to a bank of assessments to really understand your personality style, and from that to identify what's working, what's not working, what your competency gaps are, and to create your individual development plan. Well, guess what? That's where my journey of personal growth started, right? Was by taking all of the assessments and taking a look. Well, there was one of them, and it was called the Lifestyles Inventory. And it was a 360-degree assessment tool. And most of you know what that means, but just those who don't, meant that I was going to get feedback 360 degrees around me. So from my boss, from my direct reports, and from my colleagues and peers. And the assessment would be sent out, they'd complete this, it's anonymous, and they would provide all of this data, and I'd get this collective chart. An example of it is shown here, of this data that I would then, from this, begin to start making my own analysis based on the chart and the comments that were shared from others. Well, this was a real powerful experience because at the same time, what I had learned from some of the other assessments is that my group that I led, a team of people who were going to be facilitators for this new leadership curriculum, had this feeling that they responded and shared through the comments was that I'm not getting the chances, they said, point blank, to be able to be involved in the decision making. And hence I started to really get feedback and understand that feedback was a real critical part of the process. And so, of course, what's my first response to it when I sat down with my boss is, well, what's wrong with them? Can't they see what I'm trying to do here? And of course, like anybody else, I was trying to avoid that real feedback and really understand it. Well, that was just the beginning. Then in looking at this assessment tool, you had these charts as shown here, and in the index of the material that I was sent were all of these sample charts. And what you wanted to do is go and compare your chart with one of those charts to see which one compares most to what yours is. Well, I found one. It was the spitting image of mine. And hence in there, it really started to characterize myself. And again, it was hard to see at first because I wasn't used at all to looking within. I was a pretty hard victim at that point in my life, always blaming my parents and everything else, about what had happened, what was wrong in my life. But I was starting to make that connection and starting to really get this feedback here. And then as I read the definition on this chart, that's what really caught me. Because in the description, it said characteristic of a heart attack victim. Well, wow, if that didn't wake me up. So here all of a sudden, going through this process, what an amazing synchronicity it was, right? I ended up in a job of all places while I was at the lowest point of my life that was leading me towards my own personal growth, to start understanding self and understanding what was wrong. Well, that statement, I remember going to my boss and said to me, and along with a great resource we had in our department, a woman who was just incredibly personable, caring, knowledgeable. And so I got the two of them together and I unveiled, what I had discovered and found. And they said, hey, hats off. The assessment did its work, right? That's part of it. You've digested it. You're not avoiding it. And there's that typical Sarah response when we get feedback, which is surprise, right? Like in my case is, what's wrong with them? Anger, which is, hey, I didn't do this. That's them. It's their problem. Rationalization. Well, I think I probably did something that week that maybe bothered them. And then finally, there's A, which is acceptance. And that's the point you really work towards. And when you're there, you really begin to open yourself up to the concepts that you've been learning. In this case, that there were some issues, there's challenges there. And I asked them, what can I do about this? Do you know of anything? Well, one woman that was there along with my boss turned around and said, frankly, I felt a lot of what you're feeling in my life too. And something I went to might be of help, maybe not, but the whole purpose here is to really help you to be a great leader. So you're doing the right thing by taking that look inside. And so suggest to you this workshop as part of the NTL Institute called the Human Interaction Lab. Well, here's this greater look within now, right? So it's the journey is starting to come. It's still related to the work. There'll be the external adventures coming up shortly. But at this point, the NTL workshop, National Training Laboratory, was in Bethel, Maine. So I was working in upstate New York at the time. I had traveled up there, and it was a real interesting thing. We were led into a room. There were 20 strangers in with our group, and there were 4 of these groups going on simultaneously, quite a popular workshop. And what slowly but surely the facilitator would do was sort of nudge us. It was initially sort of that superficial conversation. He'd say, it's okay, it's okay. More like a cocktail party, but who's going to be the first to sort of talk about, why you're here? And sort of nudged us, and it took a little time, and it started to unfold. And lo and behold, what we all realized is that we are all struggling in one way or another in terms of connecting with other people. And so it was a little difficult at first. We all started to feel raw, but we realized we're in this together. So they provided us with experiences every day, right? We would go out, we would do an activity, and then they would ask us to come back into the room, of which people would be asked to be able to provide feedback. And feedback is when I did this. So we started to own our own feedback, but we'd also hear the feedback from others and what others were seeing in ourselves here too. And I started to get this constant set of feedback I was difficult to approach, and when they did, I had a difficult time. I was very guarded. I was very apprehensive. And lo and behold, here's this past. And I didn't realize it at that point that was starting to catch up with me, that was starting to put this cement wall around me as nobody was ever going to get to me again, right? And that's that mindset I had, is that from the abuse of my dad, that anybody was not going to get me. So I held people, sort of that push-pull. I wanted to connect with people, but I'd push them away. And I'd get this feedback constantly. And so in the final assessment, where we each had to really give our story to the rest of the group, I remember I stood up and I said, is that I really understand now one of the most powerful connections. And that is that who I am today is as a result of my past. Because the feedback you gave me was the feedback I gave to my dad. And for years, I pushed him out of the equation. I tried to forget that experience because of the pain, now only to realize the past was alive and haunting me. So now this powerful new realization had come in, and I returned back to work raw. And I divulged my experience to my boss, who had incredible trusting connection to. along with this other woman who was just an incredible colleague there. And I shared some of the major realizations. And I had said to them, is that, I get it now. There's something that I get that I've got to approach here, and I feel stuck. I'm not sure where to go right now, but I realize it now. So this whole part of the team and not being involved, and I started to make significant changes in my interactions with other people, particularly my work team, which started to transform our team into a great new connection and relationship. But it was inside me that this havoc was taking place. I was a mess inside. I had this new realization, but I had no idea where to go with it. So my boss, with the most caring of heart, said to me, Mike, he goes, I have no other ideas to suggest to you. So why don't you go downstairs and meet with our employee assistance program? And I did. I valued his suggestion. Yeah, it was nerve-wracking to consider it. It was that tough part to the ego of stating now I've got, some challenges that I can't figure out, but I did. And I went down there and I met with this most amazing counselor. And she sat there and she started to just ask questions. And she said, we have 3 sessions to get here. And from that, I'll be able to give you a suggestion in terms of, what I think you might find helpful as a next step. And so I said, all she needs from me, she said, is that, just need your openness to the questions that I ask, and the more honest you can be. And it sounds like through your experience recently at the NTL, that you've allowed yourself to open up a bit. But she kept starting to ask about my family, the family of origin, and repeatedly. So tell me about this, tell me about that. Well, I was really hesitant to open up about that. And I didn't know yet really why, but I kept really close-lipped about it, only to understand because on the 3rd session, it started to come out and it was a mess. It was the abuse, it was the pain, it was the tears, it was the anger, it was all of these elements that, like a volcano, started to erupt. Well, it was at that point when she turned to me and said, is Mike, you're in a very, challenging position right now because you're incredibly raw. You have this understanding. I'm going to suggest that you meet with a counselor group that we suggest with you. And I did. And I was at that point where I was going to accept the help that was coming to me at that point. And I did. And I started to join in to both individual counseling and group counseling as well. In fact, that's where this chart is. By this time, it was in my early 30s, I was now immersed in this phase, or this stage, as I refer to it, of our growth, of becoming our full potential, is the first part of cleaning our house, right? You've got to go inside, you got to clean out your junk before you can go and be your potential. And I was there, I was really starting to take that look within, realize there were issues and struggles there. I would soon become aware that this is what was haunting me, affecting my self-esteem. Almost every aspect of my life was influenced in some negative way based on the issues of my past. And so I started to really grow through this experience here. And this phase led me into this incredible point in my life. It was where I opened up to the help. I was willing, and outside, I found an absolute ton of resources that are available to us today to help us when we're at those points in our life where we're struggling, where we're not happy. And these are a few of them there. I mentioned about the NTL, the counseling that I went to, individual and group therapy. Support groups like the 12-step groups were, again, lifesavers for those times outside of work when I was starting to feel the despondency and despair in life. Chit Chat was this incredible program that you basically volunteer yourself to go into a lockup type setting for a week. And they intensely work on the particular issue that's holding you back. And it was incredible experience. It was just working really to understand, what really is that aspect inside that's holding me back the most? What's the skeletons in my closet, so to speak? And affirmations were the tool that I started to use to reprogram myself. And that's why I love talks when I'm with people today in front of them about specifically, my past. And there's something that's the common denominator for the group. I say the great news is that we are just like software code, to use as an analogy, right? If a software program is not working, you go and change the code. Well, guess what? We have code too. And that's our belief system. And you can change those beliefs. It takes work. Affirmations and journaling were all parts of the tools that I started to use in addition to these groups to start really coming out of this negative experience. Well, it took me about 2.5 years to get to this point, to clean out my house, to really resolve some of the issues, to heal a lot of the pain and suffering, to get back on my feet and to really have a good, healthy self-esteem to the point of which I could look in the mirror and like the person that I could see. So it was great. And I went back to work and I was great in terms of the leader and the feedback. By this time, I was really excelling now in terms of what the leadership program should really involve and understanding how important this is. Because as I see so many people around, is we tend to act out on our issues, right? Until we have that self-awareness of what they are, these are the things that sort of interfere with what our effectiveness and potential could be.
What occurred to me early on was your comment, your question, what is 1 inch beyond infinity? And that strikes me as a search for spirituality without having the knowledge or the proper language in order to do the search. That there was an internal something within you that wanted to search beyond, and that was the best you could come up with at that moment of describing that, the desire for that search.
Richard, you are so spot on. That is, well, because the very next slide, as I now started to venture forward, to break loose now, to be able to explore, relates so much what you said. And I still didn't understand it yet, but pieces were starting to come in play. And some of that story, Thoughts, comments?
That was a good point. Yeah.
Your question, we had some conversations, the band, as we've called ourselves, in previous discussions that we've had over the last month or so. You mentioned that you're coming to a massage with the person Jeff. Where was that in this journey that you just described? What time frame?
About 4 slides from now. Yes, it is. And so is not happened yet. And that's a great thing. Tom's talking about this, the 4 of us, there's 4 or 5 of us here on this call that we have an ongoing YouTube series called The Ripple Effect. And the common denominator in us is that we all really in our own way pursued, as I talked about, the Enlightenment Phase. We wanted to really understand more about life, and we connected in a very common way on it. And I'll be talking about that in like I said, a few slides on it. And we were talking the other day is where one of the guys who's not on the call here today, he's a masseuse. And, it was my experience with him at this conference. And I just finally got up the muster to go in there. And I told him just 2 or 3 weeks ago, years later, to how important that massage was, because I would never let anybody else touch me. And to have it come from another male was incredibly meaningful for me after the abuse I experienced. So thanks for bringing up that point, Tom. So with that, please feel free to chime in anytime. Don't have to stop to have these things here, because this is the transformation. This is the point. It's the call. what happened is I started to grow. I got that base foundation in place there with me in order, right? It's hard. You look at, if anybody knows the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you know, it talks about that you've got to really have your base needs met before you move to advanced needs in your life. And the top of his triangle is self-actualization. And I relate that to the Enlightenment phase as I talked about it. Well, dealing with the kind of issues and struggles I was, you know, we can't, our focus is so much on our issues and the challenges and the impact that it's had and how the ego and anger and everything really rear out, that there's no way that it's even possible to start thinking about it. But Richard, you are absolutely right. Is that what I was about to understand is that at this earliest point in my life, when I was thinking about these things, that this is what I was really thinking. And this comes from a point of which I was back at my job. You know, I was really assumed this leadership role. I was now really pulling together this really great leadership training, you know, starting to really develop leaders, getting great feedback. But it was during this time that my mentor was a vice president in this company, and his name is Al. And Al, he was in his 40s at that time, and he really took me under his wings. That was part of me being in that high potential role. I have a mentor. He was mine, and we really met pretty frequently. Now, it turned out that his life was about to change, and he had a prognosis of brain cancer with only 6 months to live. Well, you can imagine the impact that that would have. Well, our conversations changed to be very deep and profound. And it was now more conversations about, you know, life and dying and what do you want to do with he'd ask me, what do you want to do with your life now? And these things I just thought, I don't know. I have no idea, you know, but in any case, the good news is Al beat the prognosis. He cured the cancer, and or whatever, what's the term for curing cancer, Bruce? You know that
Remission.
yes, remission, thank you, right? And, you know, and so, you know, we continued forward, but he was still this profound mentor for me. And he said, my job, Michael, is to push you out of the nest. He goes, you're at this edge and I can't describe it, but you need to go out so you could learn to fly. I've got to help nudge you out. And that's what he had seen was his job in the role there. And so he asked me what I wanted to do with my life. And I told him I had no idea. And it was interesting because, again, I utilize the word synchronicity. It's a common part of today's vocabulary. I had no idea what it meant back then. Synchronicity, I sort of like how somebody described it as God's way of being anonymous. And sure enough, the amount of synchronicities that started to happen in my life, beginning with being in my job, the workshops, the assessments, the tools that started to really unfold, and the resources there to be able to help me at this point in my life really was incredibly synchronistic. Well, lo and behold, there was my colleague, and I got really along well with our group of colleagues within our department. And I'd come back to my desk and she left this saying that you see right here on my desk. And I started to read it and I literally was in tears. I had to put my head down because this was exactly what I was feeling on the inside. It was words for the first time that was talking about this inner feeling that I've had ever since a young kid of just getting out there, of understanding things. It was a call as it says here, to what life is all about. And I knew at that point, and here was Al, my mentor, saying the same thing, that you've got to go. And sure enough, as the saying here is, you may choose to be open to new experiences, to leave the limits of your conditioning, to hear the call, and then you must act, right? And so that was so profound. And so here at this point, this incredible thing gelled within me. It says, oh my God, right? OMG, here it was that there's something here, but I didn't know what to do yet at this point. And so what happened? Synchronicity. Now, here is a picture of Assisi, Italy, and here's the venture that started to happen. Well, the next slide, you'll see a picture of Vern. Vern was one of those people that I made friends with at the NTL workshop. And we stayed in touch and connected, lived far away. And he called me up out of the blue, right? And he said, Mike, he goes, I got a great price on tickets to Europe. Do you want to go? And it was just like, oh my God, yes, I'm going. And it was so strange to just see this unfold. Literally, it's just all happened within the course of a couple of weeks. It was just so profound to me. And so off we went, right? A couple months later, we had set that off and we went out and ventured. And the first stop was Germany. And we made our way through Switzerland. I was loving it. It was amazing. I was a kid in a candy store, was seeing this whole new world out there. Finally, I'd gotten beyond that fence that was forever in front of me and the rest of the world. Well, then we would adventure into Italy. And on our way to Italy, we stopped in Assisi, Italy, to the Basilica of St. Francis Assisi. And I spent hours there. It was just like this second home to me. And I talked to the monks, and here's a picture of the monks here. They're just down to earth people. A couple of them were from the US, and we just got into a conversation, and it was hours. And I said, wait a minute, do you have a paper or something? I got to make notes out of this. And so went to the little store there, bought a notepad, and just literally was writing down all these thoughts and ideas, and the simplicity of the view towards life and everything was just so profound. And here was that open mind, that sponge that I was, now ready to go out there and learn from life. Well, at that point, if everything was to stop at that point, I probably would have become a monk. And I wrote that down. I said, I could do this. This seemed right. It's just, wow, it's just so simple and different. But I also knew it was the beginning of my journey and it was more to discover. And so I wrote that down and then off we went. And so here's Vern here. He's pictured here on the left, again, the individual that I met. And he himself made this incredible awakening himself. And that's what brought us together. Lo and behold, I never knew about this side. And during this trip, we just talked about our experiences and sort of our new revelations in life. And again, how synchronistic this was. It's his brother there to the right. And he was he'd give a tour guide, in Rome. And so we would bounce around Rome. He got us the inside scoop and visits to all of these incredible locations. Here, the concept of thousands of years old just blew me away, right? Anything in the US is sort of 200 years or younger from what was known history at that point. There was just thousands of years. And so it was fascinating. And the experience was awesome. Pictured in the lower right here is this little cafeteria appropriately named Om Shanti that he led us to. And it was just so funny. Again, I had no concept of these kinds of terms or things like that. To me, it was, hey, we're going to eat. This is great. Well, we went in, and of course, very characteristic of Italy, you go into a restaurant, it's not about turnover of tables. You're there for the entire evening. It's a 7-course experience. It's all about family connections and sitting there and talking about it. Slowly but surely, they bring out each of the 7 courses. And it blew me away. Wow, life is really different. Obviously the US, the fast pace that we have, this is an incredible part of the experience. Well, I was also there that I really started to see all of these younger people, typically, that were in these hotels called hostels. And I made it a point to just go over one day and find out what it was about. And sure enough, that's where I found about how I would soon be traveling. So I'd meet these backpackers. They were people from all over the world, and they just simply had a quest. They travel on the cheap, and they would go and see the world. Yes, that's what I wanted to do. everything started to unfold. It was the experience. I never had to define anything. Life was defining it for me. I would become a backpacker. I'd travel off the beaten path and I'd listen to their stories about places that they would see, not as a tourist, but going in and really seeing the different areas, the different people, just like I did with Fern's brother, who showed me the real Rome. And I really liked that idea. So at each place I visited, I started to learn more about this concept of backpacking and realized that that's what was going to be my next adventure. So I came back following my trip to Europe. I met with my mentor, Al, and I said, I know what I want to do now. I know what I want to do. I want to go travel the world. I want to go see it. I want to be involved with it. I want to understand it. And he said, yes, it's so great to hear you say that. You know, what better time than at this point in your life, you know, before if you have family or children with other things to be able to go out there to do it. And I said, yes, that's what they did over there. Backpackers, they before they jumped into college or started a job, they'd spend a year traveling abroad. And so I decided that that's what I would do. But I was still working at the time and not ready to just jump ship at the same time. Here was my work team, right? This was what I was learning about being a leader. This is the outcome, the result of that introspective view that I was having in my life. I was becoming a really great leader. And this would influence, and this is a key influence for the recent book I just had published a month ago on leadership. It's leadership from within. And it's the whole concept that what's missing today in most leadership development is the lack of taking the time to really do that internal perspective. Because when you're able to identify those blocks that are holding you back from connecting and working with people, empowering people, and then changing yourself, you can be a fabulous influence to other people. And this was characteristic of the work hard, play hard kind of mindset that we would have. We'd laugh and enjoy ourselves and go back and do some awesome work together. And it was my first experience of really understanding the value of a high performing team. So, hey, it was cool for right now. I enjoyed work so much right now too, that, I was continuing on right now. I was holding at bay this quest to go overseas. But then something else happened. And it was only a few months later that literally, here it is, here's the story, sitting in my living room. Okay, across the living room, that's just me in the house. That's it, there's nothing else. There's this it was a classified paper, right? Just one of the penny saver, I think it was called. It just has a list of just classifieds and advertisements in it. And it fell on the floor. It caught my attention. There's no windows were open. How did it fall? Oh, well, whatever. I went over to pick it up. And here, where it opened up to was this listing about a conference right there. This is Geneseo, New York, upstate New York at that time, at the local university. And I noticed the date, it was today. It was that day. And it was about this conference that was going to host these talks and workshops that all seemed to relate to spirituality and understanding life. And all I knew is that was music to my ears. And so I called up. I was fortunately in between projects at the time. I said, I'm taking a week vacation, no problem. And I then got on the phone. I called this number that was on there. Well, there's some of you who know this gentleman. His name is Dan. And he answered the phone. And I said, tell me about this conference and what's it about? And he said, he goes, I knew I had to answer this call. I'm right here now. I've got a lot of things going on. But, if you can accept me saying this, you really need to be here. And I, what? Really? I mean, and I said, well, can you tell me a little bit about the conference? And so Eddie did, well, he goes, this is that, you have to experience it for yourself, but you will want to be here because tonight we actually have a great speaker, His name is Tom Sawyer, and he's talking about his near-death experience. I go, what the hell's that? And so, and he goes, I don't want to tell you. He goes, just come. Hey, in fact, I'll be up here when you come in. You know, just go. If not, my wife will be here. He says, we'll get you set up here. But you know what? You really need to be here this week. Okay. All right. Well, this was so characteristic of my life. It really was. I don't know how to describe it. It was just that being open, right? That Buddha proverb is when the student is ready, the teachers will come. So I did. I went and I attended a number of the different workshops that day. They got me set up. There was a Native American Indian talking about, you know, their spiritual beliefs in the traditional societies. There was some numerology workshops and healer workshops. And, you know, it was pretty different for me. I wasn't sure how to sort of take this all in right now, but, you know, okay, you know, it's sort of intriguing and I'm liking it here so far. And I really wanted to be there for this person. And, you know, all I knew Tom Sawyer was about the book. Tom Sawyer, you know, that character, Tom Sawyer, we learned about. Well, that turned into another transformational experience. And that's where I had the chance that evening to really sit and listen to a man who's 33 years old when he's a master mechanic. He knows how to work on cars. He had propped up his car in the driveway, put all of the safety mechanisms in place, and was working on the car, and the car fell and crushed him. And it was all due to a pocket of air underneath the driveway, right? So nothing that he knew about or anything else. But anyways, the ambulance had come. He had no pulse. They were rushing him to the hospital. And it was later that he was revived, and he had now what's classically referred to as a near-death experience. And he was talking about his experience. Well, I think I realized in looking around that it was not just me, but we were all on the edge of our seats. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was transforming to say, here was this guy, he seemed so down to earth, you know, and his characteristics, I came to know him, you know, to be this sort of blue collar kind of guy, down to earth and say it like it is and everything. And he just didn't seem like he was there for any other objective, you know, other than tell this amazing story. And it was about what happened when he died, you know, in between that period of him dying and then coming back. Well, he told this unbelievable story. And if any of you have ever heard stories from near-death experiences, you'd understand what that was like. Well, it blew my mind, and to the point of which I just was so drawn to this, is that there was a break. And if you know Tom, you know, he was there for hours. It wasn't just there, he'd be there for 10 longer hours, you know, at times, talking about his experience, and he just would catch these wins on it. Well, anyway, we had a break and he was walking out. I walked up to him and I said, Tom, I said, is it okay if I walk out with you? And yeah, sure, come on, you know, come right along here too. And we were just going to his car and he had to get a sweater. His blue sweater. Those who know him know what I'm talking about. And so he was at his car and he opened up, you know, his glove compartment, and there was a pistol in the car. And it's that, okay, I'll say, WTF, what the, you know, who is this guy? What was this? What was it there? And everything else, who is this guy? I go, what's that? Over there too, as he goes, oh no, he goes, there's a story behind everything. And so if you want to hear it, on the way back, he told me the story. He told me a story about it, but it was in there that I realized that this guy is just this cool, down-to-earth kind of guy, dude called Tom, that really had no ulterior motive in any of the conversation, no ego about him, and as a result made it so easy to really understand and believe. Well, that to me, along with the call and the gentleman saying that I needed to be there, was spot on. It now was telling me, you know what, this is what's so intriguing me, because this is what I've been thinking about. I didn't know what it was. There's something out there. What is it? And he started to put some definition to what that was. And it just launched this thirst of me. And the other thing that he shared about was the importance of being able to give back. And that forever changed me. It was at that point that I left that conference. I could share many stories from that experience. I shared the one about Jeff and the massage that I had. I just changed in so many ways from that workshop, just meeting people who were just like me, just trying to think outwardly, right? You know, what's life all about? What's its meaning? So we were all sort of on this quest and had 1,000 different thoughts and ideas on it. And so I left there with this realization that that's what I'm going to do. Until I can free myself up to travel, I'm going to volunteer. And I did. I became a full-time volunteer. So I'm still working, and outside of work, I started to pick up volunteer activities. And interesting, because again, sort of synchronicity had its place. This is the kind of opportunities that developed all had something in common: death and dying. And so at first, you know, a lot of people would, as I did, struggled when I first entered into these settings. But as I did, I realized how important it was to really come to understand death. That ever since my mom had died, which I'll share that experience about, which was, it confused me for years, you know, that I had to really understand it. And now here was this person who had talked about, you know, dying from a near-death experience. And so from here, I became a counselor for Children's International Camp for children who have cancer. I became an hospice care provider for years, you know, just really sitting next to those who are on their way out, you know, and just getting their stories, their perspective, which was incredibly, amazingly impactful. And then also as an emergency medical technician on volunteer ambulance, where each time I was on it was volunteer. You know, at the beginning of the day, somebody was healthy, and here was somebody who was in a tough spot, accidents, again, experienced death, mortality here. So it seemed to be that common denominator. But this was the kind of experiences that started to lead to is that here I was as a volunteer, only to realize, as I said earlier, that I was really the student. It just enabled me to be with the teachers that I needed to be around. And hence it was called volunteering. And let me give you an example of that. Camp Good Days Special Times. So here's a camp. Children come for 1 week out of the year to be with others who have cancer. It was a chance for them. I usually say to let the hair down, but for many of them, being under chemotherapy, didn't have hair, right? So it was a chance for them to be a kid and to be with others, because in their own life and experience, it was very difficult for the parents and others to be around them because they're dealing with, you know, their children, you know, having cancer and the potential mortality of their children. So it's a chance for them to come and be a child again. And so I just had this great time being around the children. They knew that they could come and talk to me about anything they really wanted to. Well, over the course of that summer, 3 separate occasions, and I say that these are 3 children, didn't know each other, they weren't there at the same time, all came to me and said, I'd like to share with you something. And the common denominator was their experiences in having cancer. And so here's, for example, one of them. This is, I haven't been able to say this to anybody, and I wanted to get your help. And I'm going to come as close as I can, sort of mimicking, you know, to really stating their actual words. Is that, you know, I was in the hospital, you know, I was really suffering at one point, and I saw this bright light in the room. And I said, okay, you know, and so what did you see in that? Well, I don't know how to tell you this, whatever, but that it was an angel. And they would hesitate, you know, over here, wait for my reaction. I'd say, oh, okay, yeah, so that's good, totally accepting it. My mom, mine, I say, be trying to figure this out, but be there for them. And they would talk about, and then yeah, they were there to utter some words, that something would happen or something would be okay, and they would share some of these experiences. Well, okay, now a couple of weeks later, second occasion. Yeah, so somebody go, well, how's the pain going? Okay, is there struggle, anything that's helping you along the way? I'd ask, and they said, well, there is something I really want to tell you about, if that's okay. I said, sure, anything. Over there too is that, well, I'm home and I was crying one night, really so much pain. And Mother Mary appeared to me. And I said, okay, and so what was it? And she said, is that I'll take away your pain, she said. And that night I didn't have any pain. And I said, wow. I said, that's quite the experience. Okay, sure, go to number 3 over here. And here is a person, also a similar experience of some kind of an extraterrestrial kind of a thing over there, of which they realized that they were going to die, but that it would be okay. I go, oh my God. It's like, wow, profound, and here were 3 things of which just taught me there's something to this. Here, out of the mouth of babes is that expression, right? It's just, here it was, people that you just didn't do anything in their lives to sort of create them having cancer, right? There was nothing to blame on them, smoking for 40 years or whatever. It was, so whatever the reasons, didn't know, but it was that experience that really taught me things. Well, it turned out that, again, they just were the ones to teach me about death and dying. And that was characteristic of the kind of experiences that I would hear, from these kids. And over time, it was the different experiences that I heard in hospice care. I'll come to that a little bit later, talk about some of the experiences that I would hear and observe there. The same kind of thing is okay, there's something really bigger about this whole experience. But it was by confronting death in these experiences, I realized that I was learning about life. I was feared death as so many do, right? Especially sitting there and watching my mom die. But when you confront your fear, as they say to do, in any aspect of your life, I realized that death was no longer this monster to fear. It was really a friend. It was something that was this valuable teacher to help me get the most out of what I had right now, this life. And this was certainly the case in hospice. And in hospice care, I love to write on these topics. It's an outlet for me to sort of just share these different experiences. And this was a series about death. And I talked about, being in hospice care and dealing with the death and dying and what it was like. Well, here's a kind of an example that I'll give. But before I do that, a quick backdrop. I said my mom died, and I said there was something there that happened that I really struggled with for years. And so let's go back, zoom back, 16 years old. We're in the hospital. We were camped out overnight as we were told that mom was going to be dying. And so we were called into a room late that night, 10 o'clock or so. And we went in there, and my mom was realized in a coma. She was in a coma for the last several days, breathing inconsistently, and that's why they had said that, she was going to be dying shortly. Well, lo and behold, we walked in, and now just picture, a person, my mom in this case, sitting upright in the bed, her glasses on, looking at us, smiling. The nurses had worked with her, had fixed her hair and everything, and she was greeting us fully alive. And she had a chance to just speak with each of us, hug us. And then she said something I struggle with for years. And she said, don't worry, I'm going to be 100% better. Well, at my age, I thought that meant that she was going to be alive. A miracle was happening. I was so excited. And then she said she was tired and asked if she would just go back to sleep. And within 2 hours, she died. And it really messed me up, I should say, in part of my life, because how dare she die when she said she was going to be better. But I say this and I share that because now in hospice care, I would begin to see these similar experiences happen again. And so here was one of the many examples that I had. So I'm sitting next to this person who is in the bed, and she's on her way out. And she came in and started, hey, how are you? Is there anything that I could get you? And as a caregiver, that was the primary role. And then to be there, very often it was just being able to reach out, hold their hand, get that human touch, and allow them to talk. Well, if you ever want a great experience to sort of help change your life, volunteer in hospice care, because you'll hear them talk about their life in a way that you never really hear people while they're living talk about, because they had no more facades to wear. They had nothing holding them back from sharing what they're viewing and what the beliefs and what they were, because why? They were largely reflecting upon their life at this point. Well, in any case, is this woman, she had said that she had a great evening last night. I was there in the morning, and she said her sister had come in and really visited her. I was a little bit surprised because I didn't think they allow people in at night. But anyway, okay, hey, maybe they made an exception, came in town or whatever, and did that and just acknowledged it. Well, great. So about an hour later, some of her family came in, and me being assigned to her, I'd always go out there and meet the family. Just they'd ask how she's doing, and just anything they're doing. And I said, hey, seems to be very more lively today. She's commenting. She just told me about her sister visiting her last night. And I mean, it was immediately I said that the wife and father of probably the daughter or so, whoever they were related to this thing there, just stared at me, just had this look, this pale look in there. And they said, what? And I said, yeah, that her sister, no. It probably was somebody else. No, she talked about it is so-and-so, and I remembered the name and everything else. And they just like, that expression became white as a ghost, and they did. They said, no, that's not possible. Her sister died last year. Right. And so these are the kind of experiences, not once, but very often multiple times that I already have, as well as the characteristics like my mom had gone through, where they would wait, that there was somebody else in their life that they were waiting to see, and they would hold on, which seemed against all odds that they would have been dead by then, would hold out until that person came in, said their goodbyes, and then they would pass away. Or it'd be a similar experience to like with my mom, that they'd be alert, and then lo and behold, being lay down and then die. And so it was really profound. But I just, on top of it, learned so much about life. In fact, I wrote one of my experiences that related to there. I wrote a blog post and it called Your Final Performance Appraisal. And what I wrote about is that during the experience of working with those on the way out, those dying, and there, if you imagine, realize they only have one thing in their hands. It's a rear view mirror, right? They have no more like a car forward vision. There is no more. It's a matter of moments, days at the most. They only have this rear view mirror of which they're reflecting about life. And I can't tell you how many times in hearing the stories, they would talk about the things that were most important to them. And that would be the things that they would love to share. Well, I usually, when I'm with people, ask them, so how much time do you think that they spent talking about their work or jobs? That's right, 0. How much is it about the material things or possessions or the home or the fancy car or whatever they got? 0. Instead, it was all about the connections to life. And how many times I can tell you that they looked at me and said, Mike, don't do what I did. And they would go on to tell me the deepest regrets. and instead share expressions, examples of stories, take time to smell the roses, spend time with those that you love and care with it. And it was so interesting because the things that they were valuing now at the end of the life are the things that we tend to forget about when we live life. That's profound. And so it helped me step back and realize all these things are those distractions in life. So this is me being this quote volunteer, where I'm the student in life, really learning about the experience, and years later being finally able to understand what had happened that night my mom died. She was indeed 100% better that night. Well, what all of this was beginning to create was this new perspective on life. And it was years later that I went to a talk. I really loved hearing near-death experiences talk. There's a famous woman, Anita Morgani. She's a great story to tell of her own near-death experience. She was laden with cancer in Thailand, I believe it was. And Wayne Dyer, if you ever heard of him, was the one who sort of recognized her, and he introduced the world to her. And she had forever had this opportunity to really share this incredible story. And so she was laden with cancer, died in the hospital, only to be revived later. And it's researched, it's proven, the doctor's notes on it is to be a week later cancer-free, and live to tell it, and live to tell about the experience, and to be that inspiration to others. Well, she shared this experience, and as you could see in this image here, it's like for most of us, it's like we walk around with a flashlight, and if you imagine life is this dark area, right? It's sort of like looking out into the universe. It's dark, we can only see very little bit. Well, like being in a dark room, if we was to light up a flashlight, that would light up a certain amount of space. As you see here, we'd see that. Well, she said that that's characteristic of life, is that for most of us, based on the beliefs that we have, what we view, our perceptions of things, that's what we choose to see. And that's the only thing we see. But if you step back and choose to open your mind and open your perspective, it's the equivalent of shining more flashlights and being able to go ahead and look on to the left and see some gems sitting over there. And that's what was happening in my life, is that each of these experiences, tough experiences to go through, was having the equivalent of opening my mind, which is the equivalent to of broadening my perspective. I was beginning to see this greater aspect of life. That really, in my view, is what enlightenment is all about. Enlightenment, it's not maybe for some people, it's this, a religious experience or event, and there's many things that really result to these kinds of enlightenment. But for me, really what it was is that this ability to be able to open my eyes and begin to see broader than my own past limiting thoughts. That, wait a minute, there's more to this. Let me understand this. Let me see this. Let me learn from this. And I began to see more and more things. Well, it's tough when you do that because the things you see start not making much sense. But if you stick with it and keep venturing out, sort of following through with this, you begin to start seeing new things. Well, one of the great other stories, I love that, using sort of this analogy, is the author of the book. I attended his talk. He wrote the book, Everything I Know I Learned in Kindergarten. I think that's it. Anyways, this is that somebody, yelled out at the thing over there. He was on the topic, a deeper topic. And they said, all right, so come on. Now, tell us what the meaning of life is. Well, and everybody laughed, thinking that was sort of a joke. And he goes, oh, all right, I will. And the room was quiet. And he pulled a little pocket mirror out of his jacket. And he caught the light in the side of the room. And he said, if we become who we really are, and we become our potential, which includes our love, it's like we've heard the expression, sometimes that we've heard God is light, or we utilize the expression love and light, or all these things. Well, the light is, let's say, in this case, the beauty, the love, the expression of the goodness in our life. And if we look around here in the rest of this room, we see a lot of areas that have dark corners, right? And isn't that characteristic of life? That when you look around in life and you watch the evening news, you see all of these areas in the world that are filled with negativity. And he says, so my view is that the meaning of life is that once we're able to really come to understand who we really are and our capability is, we broaden our light. We wake up our light. We increase our light, our love, however you want to refer to it. And if we catch it like this mirror, now watch what happens over in that dark area. And he caught the light and he sort of sent the beam over into this dark corner. He goes, there's now light in that corner. And he goes, imagine if we each had the ability to be able to take our light and share it into those dark areas of the world. It'll bring new light to it. And eventually that'll have an effect. And it was this standing ovation. Nobody expected there to be an answer to that question. And I thought that was, wow, how deep and profound and how beautiful that statement is. So good point. I'm going to jump into a couple specific visits. Any comments, questions, or thoughts have yourselves before I jump into?
Just a quick note. Bruce Grayson, longtime researcher of NDE stuff, in his latest book, After, came up with a term to describe what your mother experienced. And they called it terminal lucidity. It happens often enough they had to come up with a phrase for it.
Wow. Thanks for sharing that, Richard. That's beautiful. And by the way, Tom Sawyer referenced Bruce Grayson and others. There's some wonderful works. They've researched near-death experiences for years, actually from a scientific perspective, from that point of being that doubting Thomas, to actually go through the scientific method and to come to the conclusions that there's really something to this.
Yeah, I would like to make a comment, Michael. It was kind of interesting, and it reminded me of a film that I saw. It's probably like a comment called City Slickers, where Billy Crystal plays that guy that tries to find his laugh again, where the trek guide at some point says, like, here's like, you have to find this, and said, what, your finger? So now you have to find out yourself, like where you try to find your laugh. And I think like everybody experiences something like that, and your story is unique to what you experience. It might not be an experience for everyone. Everyone experienced that. Like, some call it midlife crisis, some have the midlife crisis like in their 50s or something. Everybody who is like on that quest or search for these kind of things can try out different things, like venture the world. So I became a bus driver because I thought like old people and young kids to drive around like in Germany back then. Now I have like a commercial driver's license here in the United States, which is kind of fun. And because you can combine like what you do like with like, you don't make a lot of money, but it kind of enlightens your way that you see. Some comments that I wanted to make is, in corporate America, everyone is like, so compared to where I come from, like in Europe, and everybody complains that they have like 6 weeks of vacation, which I could really take in a row. And here, like if you're like longer out than 2 weeks, then you're kind of obsolete in the business life. But nobody talked at the end of his life, I should have spent more time in the office. And everybody complains, but nobody does. You're kind of like trapped in that system, and nobody is like trying to change that or step up. So coming back to your story that you shared, like what made you Michael in your life is so many different things that you can only like encourage people to find that one. I had a she was a university clinic, she was an admin, and she encouraged me to do like prayers 4 hours on my knees, which gave her like the ultimate kick. And I thought about my poor knees, and that was definitely not my thing. Yeah, but everyone finds it, and sometimes people get stuck because they don't want to jump. Some people are made to jump. I had about 5 minutes to decide if I come to the United States or not. And instead of like, you're leaving the European social security network, just being on your own and then becoming fired, kind of different. It was a fun thing, but not everybody's made to that. So these are some comments that came to my mind when I watched.
Really great comments. Thanks for sharing them, because it's an absolute key point. You know, my story is simply that, my story. There's no one route there. It's a matter of just being open to really that aspect of life and allowing life to become your teacher. And we find it in our own ways. There's many, many ways to really develop these awarenesses. But you're right, there's a lot of distractions in life. There's a lot of things there. Work is one, and yet so many people, it's critical to be able to work in that way. And I say, Mike, you were so fortunate to be able to get up and be able to leave and backpack around the world. I said, yes, I absolutely was. And looking back, is no doubt about it. So, how can me, as a worker, as doing this, not a single mom, or all of these multitude of cases, and I said, is that, where there's a will, there's a way. That's all I know is that it may start with a book, it may start with some reading, it may start to just look around with you. But if there's an interest, just, find the little ways to be able to pursue that. And fortunately, the self-help section that's out there in books and libraries today, especially online, plentiful of the kinds of stories that might connect. And for me, my story is really, it's about my purpose. And I discovered my purpose. And that's to be, a person, to be a guide and influence to those on the path of personal growth and self-discovery. And that culminated after years of this journey to really be able to sit down and really identify, for me, myself. May not make sense to anybody else, but it made total sense to me. Yes, that's what I want to do. And if I could be that guide and inspiration by sharing my own story, and I became aware of that earlier on. I had people tell me, it's very important to go out there and be able to tell your story. Why? Because like a near-death experience or in others, is that by sharing that and with the openness and candidness you have about your life, you begin to be that influence. And what you were just sharing with some of those comments is awesome. That's what's great about these conversations, is you get the multitude of perspectives that are out there. Thank you.
Yeah, Mike, what I would say about that is, what came to me is you're listening to other people's stories was an important key in your experience. And to actually sit and listen, because we haven't, I've known you since that conference in Geneseo, off and on, and certainly more so during certain periods of that time. But I hadn't really heard the whole story, your story. And it was very helpful for me to take time to do that. And I think that's one of the things you were sharing in your time with the kids in hospice, that you were there to listen. You were there to give them a voice by offering to listen, to take time to do that for them. And that's what the beauty of it was. You drew that out of them. Um, and it's not so much what your story is as, to me, the lesson of learning to listen to another person and to honor that person. And I did learn some stuff. You know, it certainly was, it's not probably any of our paths, as Matthias says. It's Matthias, excuse me. Um, it's but it's the listening that we've all done tonight to give you the opportunity to share that story. But there were parts of your story that were very meaningful to me. Certainly not the history necessarily, but segments and pieces of what you shared sparked things in me. Um, and that's the beauty of taking time to do this, you know. And so I thank you for that.
It's a great thought to share, Tom, because it's so true. Is my vision quest was made up of listening, asking those simple questions, you know, just profound, but so tell me about your life. What do you believe and whatever, and then just listening to thousands. It had to be at least be 1,000 people in the path, and to listen to their life story. And we don't do that. How well do we really know people today, right? You know, and then to know that everybody has behind them this incredible life story. And what I was really fortunate to do was to be in a position where I could go across the world, literally, and ask that question, tell me about you, all over the world in different cultures. And out of that was this incredible culmination of themes that became so clear and apparent, right? You know, that's why today I see in this time of dealing with the protests and in the workplace, that's diversity and inclusion. I mean, I encountered that every day and found the absolute beauty of talking with other people. In fact, it really ties in. I'm going to just cover a couple of points. I'm going to go through a couple of slides here and then really talk about some of the spots I went in a brief thing to really cover it. But I want to share another experience. One of the other things that happened, because I was opening my mind, I was availing myself to these experiences, right? So here I am, I'm in Sedona with that group from the conference. They were there, we had like morning meetings, and we'd have, you know, guest speakers, and we'd go in this beautiful, beautiful area of the world, Sedona, Arizona, you know, climb rocks and do things. Well, it was at one point I was laying on the rock. And these other people during the conference, they talk about these out of body experiences, this and that. And, you know, I sort of kept it at bay as, okay, yeah. You know, it could be real. And I accepted those kind of things. I was no longer judgmental. But as you know, I never knew of such a thing over there too. And so we're on this side of the rock, you know, this where the facilitator asked us all to sort of just lay down and go back, and he was going to lead us through a guided visualization. Well, in any case, I show in this image, and because I was in it and I never really got zoned out, you know, being an active thinker. But in this case, something really strange happened. And what happened is I started to feel like I was falling. Now, you have to understand, for years, I've never shared this. It took me years to really even unveil this, because it was so deep, profound, and strange that it was until I sort of came to grips with it myself. So I had this falling experience, and I was falling down, right? But at the same time, I could feel myself. I knew I was sitting there on that rock, laying back. I knew that. It's sort of this parallel kind of way of existing, and I felt falling. I wasn't afraid of the falling. It was a casual fall, not a fearful kind of a fall. And lo and behold, I'm in a cavern. So if you can imagine this slide, it's a sort of a resemblance I came up of this experience where I was in a cavern. And here I was flying. I was flying. And all I could think of is saying back to Al, my mentor, you were right, you kicked me out so I could fly. And I'm flying now. And I was thinking that up front. Well, if you can imagine this up on the upper left-hand side, so you see this light and sort of angelic wings on it. So, but that's really somewhat close to what I saw. And there was this really beautiful, bright light that was on this part of this big cavern. I was in there and I flew over there. Quick backdrop. You know, I remember I said earlier, I had finished, I was in a relationship, most longer term relationship I had. She left and it was really devastating to me. You know, well, I say that because in this here, I flew up and, you know, again, there was just this light, but I knew it was her. I knew it was her. And part of my experience of going on this visit and the growth was to get beyond really just the whole divorce, to start becoming me, separating myself from the pain experience that I had had. Well, I flew over, literally, I say I flew over, and I came face to face with her. And she looked at me, and with this most beautiful, loving eyes, you know, to a person that probably was in this hate mindset with, you know, as a result of the separation. Most beautiful eyes is, she said, Mike, don't you see, I needed to let you go so that you could fly. And it was unbelievable. In that moment, it all became clear. It was perfect. It was everything. Now, I grew up Catholic. I wasn't really religious, a practicing Catholic, a lot of bad experiences in the Catholic Church. You've probably heard of some of them. And so I was really turned off of religion in large part. So I share that as sort of as sequel leading into this next step of this experience. So if you go to the sort of center of the image, after this just incredible moment with her, there was this bright light that appeared. And it just had this incredible bright light. And I flew towards that light. And I say the words flying, it's so freaky to say this at this point, to say these words, but I didn't. I flew to the light. I was drawn like an insect to the light. And as I came closer and I went into that, and there was this archetypal image. As a Catholic, I grew up there. There was this image. It was on, you know, all of our confirmation material, everything I went through of this image of Jesus Christ with this big heart image on there. And that was it. That image was right there, except he was alive. And I just stared, and then he stared at me. And in that moment, and I still can never explain it to this day, that from his heart center was this ray of light to my heart. And in that moment, I shook feverishly. And instantly I was back on the rock where I was in this guided meditation. And somebody had come over to me and started, Mike, are you okay? And people had congregated around me at that point because they thought I was in convulsions. And I said, no, I'm okay. I couldn't even deal enough with that moment to say anything. Except again, it was that moment, it would take years for me to process that experience. I just stuffed it in the back of my mind until things started to emerge for me to grasp the intensity of that situation. And it's that being open to these kinds of things that, you know, to me were like fairy tales or other things that everybody else had, were the kinds of things that were starting to become more commonplace with me. And through my experience, and here was our group, we were in Egypt. That was another great trip. You see, there's Tom in the center, the music over here, you know, but what it was what was happening is I was coming to develop my own truth. I investigated almost any religion out there. I went anything that had a different religious name. I went there at this period of my life to go, and maybe they have the answer. Maybe they have the answer. Maybe they have the answer. And I'd go and I'd meet and I'd start asking questions. And God, it seemed like they hated me for asking questions. Oh, you asked too many questions. Here, the answers are in this book. And I said, no, but that's not good enough. I want to know. I want to know. You got to just accept this. And I said, but it's not going to work for me. I have to know. I got to figure this stuff out. Well, that's all what was leading me to this drive for the truth. And it's what led me to these experiences, to really just hear so many other people unveil it and begin to start understanding this new sense of truth. And I was believing, as it says here, with my own heart and seeing with my new eyes as my perspective was growing, and learning how to speak from my new mind. And it was different. And it led me to this incredible journey, and this is what started. So lo and behold, here was the woman you see pictured here, a near-death experiencer. I love these people. Well, at one of the conferences, she said she volunteers in South Africa. If you ever wanted to join, you got to pay your own way. And a couple of years later, I'd saved up and I said, I'm there. And there's Bruce who's on here. He was a key person in sort of going through this lead up to allowing this experience to unfold, a whole nother story in itself. In any case, I was there. I ended up there, and here we are in Swaziland. The gentleman here is called a Sangoma. In literal transition, is a witch doctor. And he was the Sangoma to the king of Swaziland. And there, just to be able to sit there and share this simple yet powerful view. And then we were all volunteering there in our own ways. Margaret had a neat way of healing. For me, I really brought, because of my emergency medical background, I would go and I would teach the people, within the area, how they could do first aid with what they have there, right? Obviously the basics there. So how can you do first aid to a wound with sticks and twine and whatever they had there, or a shirt ripped up or whatever. And it was the most awesome experience that I had in terms of literally being back like I was in a National Geographic special in these tribes. And again, just listening to the stories and meeting and talking to these most beautiful people in life. And there was a perfect opportunity, because I had made myself open to the whole idea of staying there. And maybe this is home, just like when I had the experience, I was going to be a monk over at with the CC monks and in there. And so I was confronted with the situation. Well, along the way, somebody had said to me, well, when you're in these kind of times, ask the universe for guidance, kind of a thing over there. Well, I did. On the left-hand side, you see this picture of a red ball. And one of the conferences I had first experimented with this, and they had said, is okay, you'll hear these things about manifesting, whatever. There's some real truth to that. But again, you got to open your mind and stuff to it. And so they said, is if each of you could just think to yourself something that you would like to manifest, during this conference. And again, I can remember myself, what the hell? What am I going to manifest? I said, all right, I got to write something down here over here too. And I said, I said, okay, a red ball. And I'm not even sure what made me. Oh, I did, because Richard was there and he was the clown. And I said, I'm going to get a red ball. I want to get a red ball for that thing there. Well, sure enough, nobody else knew what anybody else had written down or asked for. So at the end of the conference, I'm sitting in it, and all of a sudden, this gentleman that I'd never met, I didn't even, I saw him at the conference, but I'd never met with him, came over to me, goes, hey, well, have a great time. Hey, here's a little parting gift for you, and gave me a red ball, right? I mean, okay, now we're bordering on freaky, right? I mean, this stuff was getting the kind of thing that to the layperson that was still making good part of me up, is, all right, what the hell is going on here? But anyways, years later, here I am now in Africa, and I'm starting to live my own vision quest. Do I stay or do I go? And so I was near the coast, and I love dolphins. And so I looked up to the sky and I said, all right, do I go? I feel drawn to more exploring that I really want to do, or do I stay here? Hey, help me make this decision. So, show me, a bunch of dolphins, right? I come to the beach every day over here to sort of just meditate. So just show me a bunch of dolphins. I've seen every once in a while there too. So show me a bunch of them. And so sure enough, I go out that next morning to the beach and I'm sitting there totally contemplating whatever. And sure enough, if this school of dolphins doesn't come up and just sit there, not only there, but then they stayed there and they just circled and this and that there. Okay. Now, again, if I just told you that one experience, if I just heard that one experience, I'd be writing this stuff off. Okay, yeah, what's that guy on? But it was the kind of thing that happened so repetitively that it was starting to frame up this new perspective. And so, no, I was to go explore more. That was my path, and I knew that. And so I did. I left and I went on. And these are some pictures. Here was Africa at my beck and call, a backpacker at heart. And so I would go and I'd stay in the hostels and meet some people here in this lower left in Cape Town, South Africa, to be able to go visit with. I swam with the penguins, you see me in the lower right hand. So I rode an ostrich. Yes, I did. I rode an ostrich. And that's what I was doing there. I was exploring, and here was this monkey who, out one of my times overlooking, came up and sat next to me. I was out by myself. Real weird situation. Here was this my size monkey coming and sitting next to me, and then all of a sudden sitting right next to me. And all of a sudden, okay, what the hell's going, what do I do? And so I literally at one point just accepted, okay, he's there, whatever. And then I happened to overlooking the water. And I put my hand up over my eyes as if to go see what this is to block the sun. Sure enough, the monkey next to me raised his hand over his eyes and did this. Well, lo and behold, I had this period of several hours with this monkey that was like a best friend. I mean, I had a backpack with me and it was on the ground. Well, he reached down and he lifted the flap on it and he looked inside of it. It was like, how to do this? And so he pulled out some food. And so we ended up having some food together, right? So this started to become my life. I'm now exercising it here. I actually went to the township of just north of Cape Town. I mean, these are the god-awful results of apartheid. These massive townships, as they called them, a sea of just tin shacks that were there. And I had met a volunteer in Cape Town that talked to me about it and said if I would be interested, come in, and I did. And I met Sergeant Natawe here, pictured in the lower right-hand corner, who lived there. And that's his humble abode on the left-hand side, his wife and child sitting out there living a day in the life of nothing. And yet they were the most amazing people. They would give the shirt off their backs. And here they are with nothing. And this was the most priceless possession he had, was this Casio piano. And he had it hooked up to a battery, an old car battery. That was its power source. And his gift to me at the end of the visit, I said, no, you don't owe me anything. No. I said, you were gift enough. You brought me around. He goes, no. You were my gift. And he sang this beautiful song. It was in the native language, and he talked to me about it. And I was in tears, and it was just this amazing experience of connections. Through that time, I met with easily 50 individuals who talked about a day in their life, living in starvation, in disease and famine, everything there, and how they lived and maintained their attitude was just unbelievable. If they could do it, I could do it. Now we're coming at the end of the time here, so I'll really come to the end. I mean, it was during this experience, it was on adventures and safaris, and here's a classic case of which I just left. I just would walk in any direction and I'd meet families and people. And here I am in Zimbabwe. Here's the border at Zimbabwe, right? I mean, this is classic Africa. And I would just meet with people. In the lower right-hand corner, here's a guy who he lived out on the road. His family was, some hours away, but he would clean up. His responsibility was to clean this road following the winter rains. And so he'd go and he'd have this little pop-up tent of which he'd pop up every night, he'd stay, and the next day he'd go and do some more of the road. These were the day in the life of these amazing, incredible people. You know, I came back and I wrote about this, and I just realized there's just so much out there. It says over here is Africa does, it changes you forever. It's like going back to the beginning of life. It's that simple, it's that basic, and seeing what's there. I started to read voraciously in terms of books. I found new movies and favorite movies, the story of Viktor Frankl, amazing story of a Jew in the concentration camp in Auschwitz, and that would lead me to going to Poland. And I made a promise to the kids in the international camp for the cancer camp. The group I was responsible for was the group from Poland, and they made me promise that I would come visit them, and I did. And so this was their setting. I went to the simpleness of the life. A horse and cart would go by every day selling the milk and wares and things that they would need to do. And I spent time with the family to go and really be with them. And several of the kids that had died, Beata herself, who's pictured here, would die 2 years after this. And we had this most awesome experience about death. And she taught me. And she wrote this poem about cancer and how that gave her life itself. And that taught me so much about life. And then I went to Auschwitz, and I promised I would, because of the reading the book of Viktor Frankl and his own experience in Auschwitz, to go and see that gut-wrenching experience of seeing what so much of life is about. It helped me understand that pain and suffering is really a purposeful part of life. It's not something to run and avoid, but to embrace, because it's the kind of thing that teaches us lessons. Because as the expression says, no pain, no gain, right? So very often it takes us to be, as I was, in these very painful circumstances in life, ready to sort of end it all, that we begin to open ourselves to help. And in that openness is how we can ultimately, and in our own way, come to understand the power of life and what it is, and how to cherish this absolute moment. I traveled to Russia to see the experience of what it's like. You know, for there, it was just post-perestroika. And here was a scene of grandmothers out selling anything, because for the first time, the people were out of work and on the streets selling things, and to see how life was sort of shaping up, where we were all gung-ho and seeing democracy growing, but I was there to see firsthand the pain that it was causing all of these people. I had this fantastic experience sitting there and seeing Lenin's tomb, which taught me what was it that happens in societies and cultures that really holds up, you know, these key people to rule, right? And I think we've had and seen some of our own experiences with that, you know, to realize and see how societies honor and hold these things and people revered in life, when it's really not about them. It's about the people that's there. And then I started to see this common denominator, because of being in Berlin, you know, before the Berlin Wall came down, being in South Africa just after apartheid was coming down, you know, to be in Russia post-perestroika, again, they're still struggling today, and to be in today's experiences, you know, just the protests in here, the economy failing, global warming, and all of these things that are out there are all characteristic of the struggle and strife. Well, my eyes have been open, and I'm not suggesting you think this way or not, but to see this new in a whole different way, because now I see it as, guess what? The world is waking up, and it is, one person at a time. And these events, just like the pandemic and everything, are here for our benefit, to really grow. And rather than focus on the pain, see the benefits it's bringing. It'll forever change the nature of work in so many positive ways. And people were aspiring for work-life balance and finding it now with the remote experience. Just one tiny example of the pandemic experience. But the quest now to realize that we needed to operate collaboratively as a globe to try to figure this out, not as individual countries trying to figure this out as we've been doing for centuries. But all of this ultimately to the conclusion that once stripped of our comfort zone, all our surroundings. And that's what happened with me, to go away from that sort of comfort zone as I was experiencing that call with the call, was this opportunity for me to be able to step into the uncomfortable, to then, with an open mind, learn from life itself. And that's what led me through this process of change. William Bridges talked about it. You need to end things before you enter into that neutral zone, which is that curious, hard, challenging place of figuring things out before you can get to that new beginning. And my final realization, there's meaning to life. There really is. I don't know what it is. I've heard some people talk about things about it, but that's whatever. I can accept a lot of different things. All I know is there's meaning to life. And that's so convincing that it helped me heal my past and live my life in a way now that really focuses on me being me, my focus, and my purpose. And the irony is one of these great proverbs. Before enlightenment, as we all did, we chop the wood and carry the water, right? Characteristic of the work that we do, the things we see as the routine, the grunge, the thing we do day in and day out, the grind of it. And then after enlightenment, what did I return to do? To chop the wood, raise a family, and carry the water, right? To go back to that basics of life and what we're living here. It's so beautiful when you step back and see it from this new perspective. It's life emerging and opening. Yeah, it does suck at time. It really does suck at time. And it sucks when we look at through that lens and realize that that's life. But instead now, I say is, wow, here's more opportunities to wake up. Thank you so much for your time and spending with me. I hope that it was helpful, engaging, thoughtful to you. I'd love to hear your own comments. You know me, you know how to get in touch with me. I hope that this was something meaningful to help, maybe even throw some ideas for your own thoughts and things about the world going forward, or whatever. And maybe some things that you can go out there by sharing your life story, help to be that influence to others. But I really, truly, from my heart, say thank you. This was a real honor to be a part of your time. I look forward to the chance to be able to meet again. And as I mentioned before, if there's chances where you see is for the opportunity for me to share the talks or thoughts on these things here, I do it free of charge. I love doing this. This is happiness for me. So I'm very happy to be able to share these things if you feel there's value of others. I'll be hanging around here. If any of you are hanging around, love to hear from you. Not going to run. Again, thank you for your time. And I really appreciate the time that we spent together today.
Thank you, Mike. It was
Thanks,
beautiful.
Michael.
Yeah. Thank you, Mike. Yeah. Yeah. Take care, everybody.
Yeah. thank you.
Yeah.
Who would have imagined that my
Yeah.
career coach at Lee Hecht Harrison has that kind of background? It's always fun to hear the stories. Like one of my first bosses said, I need people with 3 grades, like the 3-dimensional or multidimensional. And it's also like interesting to hear what is like behind those stories. These are the most important or like interesting humans I've found.
And isn't it amazing that we connected? And I told you, you were right from the beginning, really a different person because you communicated more like even like you did tonight. That was there. And so it was just one of these other amazing meetings. Thank you.
Mike, I would be curious to find a word for something that comes to mind about you right now, is that you chose, what I perceive is chose not suicide, and everything that unfolded after that was this story and your revelations and your sharing. So it's like there's another conscious choice. It's like you had a choice to commit suicide, or at least you were contemplating it. And your choice not to needs to be perhaps seen as something that we could label as someone who overcame that and had a profound life as a result of that?
It brings a lot of emotions, and thank you for sharing that, Tom, because I know that period of pain, and I know it well, which I realize is a real gift, because it's when we really come to know pain that we can help others who are in that pain. And to me, that was the gift that I was given, and to also to understand. So we did that ripple effect session as we're doing here on suicide, physician assisted suicide. And that's why this has such great meaning to me, is because I have a very different view since my brother took his own life, on suicide, because I know what's going through those minds in people. And that's what led me at one point, and I'll never forget this story, is where I was in Seattle, and I just was out, and I was traveling, I was backpacking, and I was going out to Vashon Island, and I was with a group of friends. We were just visiting Seattle for the day. And I was just on this boat, and the guys didn't know this deeper side of me. And all I said is, excuse me, where are you gonna go? I said, I just gotta go talk to somebody. Oh, is it, somebody? I said, no. I said, I don't. I can't explain it. I just gotta do it. And who is that? And I said, well, it's that girl over there. Well, of course, she's beautiful. That's why you gotta talk to her. And I said, no, it's okay. It's okay. Well, anyways, I went over, and I stood by, we were both at the edge of the boat, on the thing that was driving us to the island. And I just said, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, just saying hi, and so, and I said, oh, that's a nice of you. That's say hi. I says, yeah. I said, I'm heading over there there's a backpacking hostel and stuff over there. Oh, you're doing that? Yeah. And I said, so, do you mind if I ask, why you're heading over there? And she goes, no, I really don't want to talk about it. And so I said, well, what have you been doing? And I said, I've been going around the world and sort of sharing things. And she goes, so you're on ambulance and things like that. Yeah. And she goes, yeah, no, I can appreciate pain, and too. And it was just a moment in there. I can't even explain it. It's just, I had to say to her, I said, are you okay? And she just started crying, and she was on her way to go commit suicide. And I don't know what happened, but I really feel at some level that I was somebody at this key point in her life that could relate to her, that maybe she didn't have, and that's what I just did in that moment. So that one where I appreciate sharing it, I still see it is that's why I love to do this. It's part of now, who said that, now, the real story, is that because me deciding to stay alive, in effect, allowed me to get all of these gifts. And these gifts, it's not like something you go and sort of put up on pedestals or things like that. It's a responsibility. And I know, Tom, you know that, because that's you too. It was the responsibility to go and do things with it, that I had to go. And the thing that I knew, the most precious point that I had learned is that pain and suffering is so instrumental to life and how we look at it wrong. And it's just like that saying here, no pain, no gain, is that the reality is it's a gift. It's telling us that something's wrong. And if we could just be there for each other when they're in that point, that's when we have that opportunity to reach out, potentially make that difference. And that's what I learned. That's that meaning of life. We're here. And so there's a reason for this. There's a reason we've got to go through this human experience, whatever that is. I totally accept it. And I've learned a lot of those things, like I said, from near-death experiences to expand on and explain that. For me, I love to keep it simple and spiritual, the KISS method. And in there is just that we just need to be there for each other and just have to reach out and to connect, because you never know when that smile that you're making to somebody walking across that street is going to make their day. And that's the part we can remember from Tom Sawyer. And one of the things that he shares, is that in his death experience, he actually could experience how others were responding to things that he did and said. So when he was angry and something else, he could feel on a cellular level the impact that it was having on these other people. And on the opposite side, and he shared this one example I'll always remember, is that when he looked at this bush or tree or whatever it was, and he said, oh, that's beautiful. In his life review, as a part of his near-death experience, he experienced at a cellular level what it was like to be that tree or bush, experiencing that love comment and all of the beauty that it provided and how a tree experienced that. So when we do smile, when we say, I love that, when we do that, we really are making so much more of a difference than we can at this point know. And so smile, right? Smiles, everyone smiles, and happy day, say those kind of things to other people is that it emits this positiveness into the person, the self, the universe at large that makes a difference. And that's, so Tom, thank you. I'm sorry I expanded on the comment, but.
Well, Richard mentioned people who had committed suicide and survived and came back and changed their lives, and then they shared. But your experience is similar to that, but it's the choice to not do that was, something I think happened in that choice for you. I think you could have done it and you didn't. And because of that, you were given a new life. So it's a re-life experience or a pre-life, some kind of thing that I think there must be other people who perhaps share that.
Kind of, you're talking about him making a change of direction in the direction in how his life was going. He was,
yeah. That in choosing not to commit suicide, it was a profound enough experience to take the place of a near-death experience or something like a near-death experience that would open you up and give you meaning and others.
Yeah.
Renaissance.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
A renaissance.
Renaissance, yeah.
Yeah, so thank you for not for not doing that.
Right? That's it. That's the best gift I gave myself, right? Was to really to do that. And I think that's why, I found my own uniqueness, right? Is having this different vantage point of pain and suffering, and being able to relate to it, right? Because it's when you connect with people, it's because you can relate to it, and that's why for many of us, we have a hard time when somebody's in pain because we don't know what to say, right? Unless we've been there, and when we're there, we can relate to that. So, but I did, and I think that thing that changed me related to this little inner voice that I had ever since I was a kid. And that was the one that was thinking about what's an inch past, infinity and the kind of deeper thought. And I had that side of me that seemed to have a life of its own or an aspect of myself or something that I knew I wanted to explore. I knew I wanted to do things, and I didn't want to succumb to being behind the fence until I got out there. And so I sort of had to pass my key point, right? We all have those milestones in life, and that milestone was just reaching bottom, a point where there's two ways to go. This is two ways, it's simple.
Well, like you said, you had your own unique story, and again, perhaps Tom, what you're saying, or I said renaissance or rebirth, you could say, but it's like when you found yourself in your 20s with your background, it's almost like you were that was the process of being reborn, and you had to shed the placenta that you were encased in still from this background, and the only way you could do that was to shoot across the world. You know, you followed your bliss across the world, and you were fulfilling your thing. I mean, it's different for everybody. Not all of us are called to travel the world like that, but certainly, yeah, it kind of all fits together with what you're saying, Tom. It's like if that was the point, the key point, the inflection point of his life, where he said yes to life and made the most of it.
Tom simplified the challenge of life down to a quick phrase one time. There's only two things you really need to do: keep breathing and be willing. And you certainly fulfilled that, Mike.
That's beautiful, Richard. I gotta remember that. Remind me that again, because that's perfect. That's what I did, right? That's what I did. Keep breathing and be willing. Yeah, Bruce, you were an awesome part of the trip to Africa. You remember, I was visiting you when your mom was still, around with you. What an awesome experience it was. And for the other benefit is I was visiting him, and that was my domestic kind of travel, go out and see things, and this Africa kept coming up, and it was just sort of these ways. There was a hit song back then, "Down in Africa," whatever what did that one there, and then there was a documentary on thing about how you got to go to on Africa, about experience of it. And I said, God, somewhere's there. And I remember being with Bruce at the time. And so what is it about Africa? And I got to know. And he goes, and I remember we were talking because Margaret Keane, who I mentioned there before, who was the one who hosted that trip, at a conference. And I said, yeah, you know what? And Bruce, you had brought her up. I swear you did, because that's how yeah, Margaret, yes. In fact, I got to call her. I'll call her while I'm here. Now, again, remember, Margaret had near-death experience, and she had this real, gift herself. And so I did. So I said, I'm going to go. That sounds intriguing. Again, all I had was that explore mindset, to go out and do this. So I called Margaret with the intention of saying, hey, do you still do those trips to Africa? And so, but I called up, she answers the phone, and which she said she rarely does. And so she goes, oh, hello, Mike, I've been expecting you. And it was, oh, no, here we go again. I mean, but to me, that was like normal at that point. It wasn't even really a surprise. And lo and behold, that's what brought me to these events. And this is just, happening over and over again in my life as these things were unfolding. I like storytelling. It's fun, isn't it? Majda, how are you? So good to see you.
Thank you. Good to see you. And very inspiring, actually, story. I didn't know that part of your life, and it was very motivating to hear about it. And, just like everybody said with the near-death experience, it's like, in a way, God gives us a chance, and then we can either take it or leave it. And in that sense, you were given that chance, and you took it, and you made lots and lots of prospects out of it, and actually was able to improve and explore the world, and also explore yourself within. And we all have gifts inside of us, and you found that gift where you can not only improve on yourself and find a meaning for your life, but also find meanings for other people's life and help other people down the road, which even gave your life a better, I would say, a more outlook for a better mission. Like now you are on the go, you have a mission, and you want to spread the good and help the world in a way, so that gave you, I would say, more of a push, to explore, to learn, to be more positive, and to find your strengths. I can say that. And you did. I mean, look
Now's
at
the time
now.
to say that I
Yeah.
knew when I met you, and I was working with her in the same venue at Lee Heck Harrison Career Coach, and just I could see it. I mean, how you described just who you were, how you were. I mean, you're an amazingly special person, and it was so hard to see go through the struggles of the work and what it's been and the difficulty and everything. And just, now it's my time to scream it and say it. I couldn't then to say that. It's just, you're an incredibly special person. You really are. To see that you signed up for this is, I said, oh man, boy, does that bring back memories, just like it does with Matthias. Matthias is that it was just, awesome. And I wish I could, snap my fingers and create that thing, but I just know the beauty you have within you, and that was so evident. This is just a good setting and chance to be able to say it to you in person.
Oh, thank you. I'm happy that I came in, and I was very thrilled to hear everything about you in a deeper level, and also meet other people. So it's nice. And also that gives me, because as you can see, I still didn't have time to dye my hair. So I'm still going through struggles, but at least,
Yeah.
I always look at the tunnel at the end, or the light at the end of the tunnel. So that's how I look at life. I'm very positive.
You are. You are. That's what makes part of you just so incredibly special. It's that glass half full, even when you were in a glass half empty setting.
Yeah,
It's
thank you.
really
Thank you. I'm happy. I'm privileged I got to meet you again and speak with you.
special.
Yeah.
Well, real honor, everybody. I just really appreciate each of you here too. Richard, you've just been incredible, and it's nice to sort of unveil. We've talked about our challenges and pasts and relationships and things and stuff, that's had in common. And Bruce just been such a key part of the journey with your mom, Tom Sawyer, and just our friendship here too. And Tom, of course, what's life without Tom? Everybody has to have a Tom in their life. They do. He's just, and to me, it's that wise person. You always have that way, a gift of putting things in the right word that Richard just mentioned here, those two things that you said. And you always bring incredible value on there. So it was such a pleasure to be with you all again.
Thank you. Same here. It's a pleasure. So we'll